Most people think war is the ultimate failure of diplomacy. They see it as a black hole that destroys wealth, lives, and stability. They are usually wrong. In the cold, calculating language of finance, war isn't just destruction, it's an investment. It is the ultimate mechanism to reset debt, redistribute global power, and force humanity to pay for the innovation of killing. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. To understand why war is a financial tool, we have to look past the smoke of the battlefield and into the balance sheets of the state. For centuries, the biggest problem for any ruler, from the kings of the Middle Ages to the presidents of the modern era, was how to tax a population that didn't want to pay. In times of peace, people demand accountability. They ask where their money is going. They want schools, infrastructure, and stability. But war changes the math. War creates a unique type of leverage, survival at any cost. When a nation's existence is threatened, the social contract is rewritten overnight. Citizens who would protest a 2% tax hike for schools will willingly accept 20% inflation or massive war taxes if they believe it asks for the defense of the nation. War is a force majeure for the entire economy. It allows a state to expand its power, its debt, and its control over resources in ways that would be politically impossible in peacetime. History is written by the victors, but it is funded by the creditors. Consider the year 1815. While the world watched the Battle of Waterloo to see if Napoleon or Wellington would emerge supreme, the real victory was being won in the London Stock Exchange. The Rothschild family didn't just win a bet on a war, they captured the entire British bond market. They understood that the winner of a war is not the general who stays on the field. It's the entity that holds the debt of the survivor. War is the only time a government will pay almost any interest rate to secure a loan. It creates a massive, sudden demand for capital. This capital doesn't just evaporate. It flows from the public taxpayer into the hands of the private military-industrial complex and the banks that finance them. War isn't just a loss of wealth. It is a violent, rapid redistribution of it. There is a dark irony in economic history. Some of our greatest technological leaps happened because we needed better ways to destroy each other. From the development of interchangeable parts in muskets to the birth of the internet, GPS, and jet engines, war forces innovation at a speed that a peaceful market cannot match. But this innovation isn't free. It's subsidized by the state. War allows the government to pour trillions into research and development under the cloak of national security. Once the war ends, these technologies are privatized, allowing corporations to build empires on the back of research paid for by the blood and taxes of the population. By the mid-20th century, the relationship between war and finance reached its most sophisticated form, the permanent war economy. In 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex. He saw that the fusion of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry was new in the American experience. This wasn't just about defense, it was about the economy's structural dependence on military spending. If you stop the wars, you stop the orders. If you stop the orders, you stop the growth. In a debt-based monetary system, the system must always expand to pay off the interest of the previous debt. War provides the perfect justification for this expansion. When a tank is destroyed, it represents a perfect economic good. It has been consumed in a way that requires an immediate replacement. It doesn't sit on a shelf, it is vaporized. In the cold logic of GDP accounting, destruction is growth. Every missile fired is a purchase order for a new one. It is the ultimate insurance policy for an industrial system that requires constant, high-velocity consumption to avoid stagnation. Look at the modern world. We see sovereign debt levels in advanced economies climbing to heights that were previously only seen during world wars. But we aren't in a global war, or are we? The war on terror, the war on drugs, the proxy conflicts in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. These are the modern expressions of a financial reset. They allow central banks to expand their balance sheets. They justify the stimulus of defense spending. They provide the necessary shock to distract from the structural failures of the banking system. When a currency is under pressure, a small, controlled conflict can often act as a stabilizer. It drives capital into safe haven assets, usually the currency of the dominant military power. It allows for the restructuring of trade routes and the seizure of strategic choke points. This is why the dollar's role as the global reserve currency is inseparable from the power of the U.S. Navy. You don't just trade in dollars because it's convenient. You trade in dollars because the architecture of global trade is enforced by military leverage. We are taught to hate the violence of war, but we are rarely taught to watch the flow of capital behind it. War doesn't just burn money, it anchors it in a new power structure. It resets the ledger. It ensures that the cycle of debt and dependency continues for another generation. Under feudalism, power was tied to bloodlines and land. Under capitalism, power is tied to capital ownership. But under the war finance model, power is tied to the ability to mobilize destruction as a means of financial reset. The mistake is to believe that the system wants peace, the system wants stability, and sometimes the most stable way to manage a collapsing, debt-ridden economy is to trigger a conflict that justifies the next round of borrowing. This is the ledger of blood. Every life lost on the field has a corresponding entry in a creditor's book. If you look at the 20th century, the two greatest expansions of middle-class wealth followed the two greatest destructions of capital in human history, World War I and World War II. The Reconstruction effort, the Marshall Plan, the rebuilding of Japan and Germany, wasn't just an act of kindness. It was the greatest market-opening exercise in history. It converted ruined nations into new consumers, all tied to the same financial architecture, the same creditors, and the same currency. This is the cycle of the phoenix. The old debt is burned in the fire of conflict, and a new system is born from the ashes, usually with the same people holding the pen. For the individual seeking financial freedom, understanding this is vital. You must recognize that the volatility you see in the news isn't random. It is the result of a system that uses crisis to consolidate leverage. When you see headlines about rising tensions, don't just look at the maps. Look at the bond yields. Look at the energy futures. Look at the defense stocks. The market is often a more honest historian than the textbook. It doesn't care about the ideology of the war. It only cares about who absorbs the risk and who captures the upside. In the modern era, war has become more abstract. It is fought through sanctions, cyber attacks, and currency manipulation, but the financial goal remains the same: to protect the property rights of the elite and to ensure that the debt machine keeps turning. The ledger of blood is now digital, but it is no less real. Financial education is about more than just numbers. It is about recognizing the framework of incentives that governs our world. If you want to navigate this system intelligently, you must recognize that freedom in the market is conditioned by the state's power to enforce it, and the state's ultimate tool of enforcement has always been, and will always be, the organized mobilization of force. History does not hand out moral simplicity, it hands you structure. Capitalism is a framework built around property and profit, but it requires political architecture to function, and that architecture is periodically tested, broken, and rebuilt through the mechanism of war. Understanding this distinction is the difference between being a pawn in the game and being a student of the board. If you want real wealth, you must understand how ownership operates during a crisis. If you want financial freedom, you must understand where leverage sits when the rules are being rewritten. The smarter move is to see war not as an anomaly, but as a feature of the system, a tool used by those who own the assets and write the rules to ensure they stay in control of the upside, while the rest of the world absorbs the risk. Once you see the pattern, you stop arguing slogans and start asking better questions. Who is funding the conflict? Who is manufacturing the tools? Who will own the reconstruction? Those questions matter more than the labels we put on the sides. History has shown us that while the players change, the structure of leverage remains. The ledger of blood is never closed. It is only carried over to the next page. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look. Would you like me to create a full script for the digital choke point? Why the world's financial system depends on a few undersea cables? Next.